The information contained herein should not be used as substitute for the advice of an appropriately qualified and licensed physician or other healthcare provider. The information provided here is for information purpose only. The views and opinions expressed in the media or comments on this channel are those of the speaker or podcaster and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions held by this podcast network. This podcast is brought to you by Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate, powered by Kangaroo Fern Media Lab. Kangaroo Fern is Australia's independent video and podcast management agency with a mission to help individuals and entrepreneurs to start their own podcasts and harness the power of podcasting.
A Kangaroo Fern production.
A Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate production. Are You Okay is a podcast that talks about anything on emotional, psychological well-being. Kahit ano, basta kayang sagutin, pwede. Andito ang Are You Okay para tulungan kayo at bigyang linaw ang mga bumabagabag sa inyong mga salubin. Are you okay is a question you can ask somebody, start a chat, and even save a life. Kasama si celebrity psychologist Camille Garcia. Powered by Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate.
Hello, onliners! Are you okay? It's already episode 8. So, unang-una po, sana palagi kayo magla-like at the same time subscribe and share itong podcast na to. Salamat po sa Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate for this opportunity na binibigay niyo sa akin. At the same time, I would like to thank Kangaroo Fern Media Lab dahil kasi tinutulungan po nila mga podcasters na katulad ko, lalo na po kung kayo ay nag-umpisa. Sana rin po ay patuloy po kayong mag-subscribe para sa gano'n naman ay medyo dumami-dami ang ating mga subscribers. Pero una po sa lahat, ako'y nagpapasalamat dahil kayo patuloy na nagtatangkilik dito sa aking podcast na Are You Okay? So, ano po ba ang ating topic ngayon? Alam ko na marami na ang nagsasalita tungkol sa topic na to at in fact, paulit-ulit po na pinag-uusapan siya. Yet, napakahirap isipin bakit ba nangyayari ito. I'm talking about suicide. So,
your podcast journey starts here. Take the first step on your side. Hustle with us. It starts with a great domain. Get your podcast web host with Beard and Coffee at www.beardandcoffee.com.au or find us at Facebook.
First, siguro, I would like to make a disclaimer na lahat po ng aking sasabihin dito ay talaga po mga research at saka mga nasaliksik ko at wala pong kinalaman dito ang Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate kung ano man po ang aking opinion regarding dito sa topic natin. It can be hard to think about itong suicide na to pag pinag-uusapan natin and much less talk about it. In fact, many people, sabihin na natin, medyo they shy away pag ito na yung subject. And then, kumisan sabihin nila, it is something frightening, at the same time, napakahirap intindihin. Certainly, it is so difficult when you try to say and understand na naintindihan nyo kung bakit ang isang tao ay nagpapatiwakal or kinikitil nila ang kanilang buhay. But remember, it is not always clear why a person makes this kind of choice. In general, suicide often isn't just an impulsive act. To people who consider it, it might be something like ito na yung pinakamabuting solusyon para may ayos niya ang kanyang buhay. So, una nating isipin, when we talk of this topic, language really matters. So, palagi natin isipin, suicide is preventable. But to prevent it, we must talk about it. And the way we talk about it really matters. To start with, when you say to commit suicide, yun po yung nagkakamali tayo. Nag-commit ng suicide. Pag sinabi nating nag-commit ng suicide, ibig sabihin talaga pong namatay yung taong yon. So, pag sinabing ganun, ay nag-attempt
We are Independent Podcast Network. We are Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate. Would you like to hear your brand while supporting quality podcasts? Contact us now at advertise@guerrillapodcastsyndicate.com.
Mag-suicide. It's a suicide attempt. Hindi natuloy. Naggawa siya pero hindi siya namatay. So, ang tawag doon ay suicide attempt. Ngayon, meron naman po ng mga naiisip lang tungkol sa pagpapatiwakal. Ito po yung tinatawag nating suicidal thoughts or tinatawag nating mga suicidal ideations. Iniisip niya pero hindi po talaga gagawin ng isang tao. So, maliwanag po yung mga terms na yan, ha? Kasi kumisan palagi nating sasabihin, uy, naku, si ganito, nag-commit ng suicide, pero ba't buhay? Kasi yun na nga po, it's just a suicidal attempt. Okay. So, next nating pag-isipin, bakit ba nakukonsendera ng mga tao itong tinatawag nating suicide? You may find it difficult to understand. Dahil kasi parang sabihin natin, ay siguro may depression na yan sa pag-iisip, kaya ganito na talagang ginawa niya yun. Ay, siguro yan kasi wala na yan sa tamang ulirat, kasi nagda-drugs yan, kaya tuloy nag-commit ng suicide. And you would even say na parang, ano ba talaga ang dahilan? Samantalang alam namin, depressed lang yan at saka may anxiety. All of a sudden, biglang isip na mag-attempt o kaya naman mag-commit ng suicide. So, even yung mga eksperto po, hindi po naiintindihan kung bakit ang mga tao ay talagang ginagawa ito. And then, there are a lot of, sabihin na natin, mental health issues na can play a role para sabihin na bakit nga ba tinutuloy o ginagawa ito na isang tao. So, ang mga mental health issues na pwedeng apektado at nag-iisip ng ganito ay unang-una ang depression, yung tinatawag natin substance use disorders, yung paggamit ng bawal na gamot o kaya naman pag-aabuso at nagkaroon ng addiction at ito ay mga gumugulo sa kanilang kaisipan. Meron din pong possibility because of a bipolar disorder, yung mga PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder and psychosis. Maaaring iba po ay walang mental health issues pero they will attempt or even consider itong suicide. It's because of the possibility na meron silang deep emotional pain. Ito yung nakakalungkot. Kasi when you talk of deep emotional pain, ito yung nararamdaman nilang sakit sa araw-araw na buhay nila na parang hindi nila maintindihan kung bakit ganito na bigla na lang sobrang nalulungkot nila. Tsaka ang sakit-sakit na sobrang yung physical pain, gusto nilang maramdaman dahil kasi hindi nila maintindihan dahil they are so emotionally numb, gusto nilang saktan yung sarili nila. Kaya po, meron nga po yung mga tinatawag nating slashers na everyday para lang maramdaman yung talagang sakit. They have to do it at the same time parang to experience yung pain na gusto nila talagang maramdaman kung ano ba yung sakit na yun, and then they get satisfied dahil kasi nalilesen yung anxiety na nararamdaman nila. But there are other factors that contribute to this, including yung tinatawag nating breakup or yung pagkawala ng isang mahal sa buhay. Kumisan, nakakalungkot lalo na kung nawalan ka ng anak, namatayan ka ng asawa, or merong isang kaibigan na malapit na talagang mahal na mahal mo at nawala siya. Maaaring maging contributing factor to. Meron din yung tinatawag natin, lalo na ngayong pandemya, yung financial distress. Kasi parang sinabi mo na wala ka ng kakayahan para makapagtrabaho or wala talagang tumanggap sa'yo sa trabaho at talagang nadideplete na yung funds natin. Ayun, talagang nakukonsidera itong bagay na to. There's also this persistent feeling of failure or shame, nahihiya na, or kaya parang kahit na saan ba pumunta, ilang beses na nag-a-apply, palaging wala pa rin nangyayari, kaya parang hiyang-hiya na siya sa kanyang sarili. Ganito po yung mga maaaring contributing factors. Definitely, meron din pong tinatawag tayong mga medical conditions or terminal illness. Siyempre po, kung tayo ay talagang sabihin natin nasa terminal stage na isang sakit, parang nagko-contemplate yung ibang tao na isipin na mas mabilis yata or mas maigi, ito na yung option ko para hindi na rin ako mag-suffer. Or kaya naman merong mga medical conditions na talagang it's a point wherein parang wala namang lunas itong sakit kong ito. So na pag-iisipan nila itong bagay na to.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button now. This podcast is possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
Sometimes, you have to also consider the fact na meron din pong mga ibang tao na because of their traumatic experiences nung bata sila, their adverse childhood experiences like yung trauma, yung abuse, yung pagbubuli sa kanila, maaring ito din po ay mag-contribute sa tinatawag nating pagpapatiwakal. There is this possibility na meron ding discrimination, yung mga racism or challenges related sa isang immigrant or isang minority. Kaya nga po talagang kinakailangan pag tayo ay maging isang OFW, stable at ang ating emosyon and psychologically sabihin na natin maayos po tayo dahil pag tayo ay talagang tinamaan ng lungkot, maaring mag-set in ang depression. Kaya nga po sinasabi na mas maigi na pag kayo ay nangibang bansa na, you have to stay connected. Kung minsan din po, pag kayo ay convicted of a crime or nagkaroon kayo talaga ng patong-patong na kaso, parang hindi na nakakayanan ng inyong kaisipan at kung napapanood niyo sa mga sinihan, di ba? Pag talagang sobrang problemado, ayun, ginagawa nila itong escape or parang option. Having possibility of a gender identity or sexual orientation that isn't supported by family at talagang nakakalungkot mang isipin na hanggang ngayon ay it is a battle for some people with gender dysphoria that they cannot come out dahil kasi sobrang ang pamilya ay hindi matanggap ang mga ganitong klaseng sabihin na natin, orientasyon, umaabot pa rin na talagang nagiging unstable ang ating kaisipan at naiisip ito. Facing more than one type of distress can sometimes increase yung tinatawag nating suicide risk. Kasi tandaan nyo na yung hindi lang naman po pwedeng sabihin nyo na isang sitwasyon lang, katulad mo, nawalan kayo ng isang mahal sa buhay. Pwedeng kumisan po nagpapatong-patong Nawalan na kayo ng trabaho, hiniwalayan pa kayo, namatayan pa kayo. Kumisan pag ganun po talaga, talagang parang nakakalungkot. At the same time, it's not only depressing, pero yung bang wala na kayong option sa buhay. Kaya kumisan, ganun po ang nangyayari at napag-iisipan ito. How can I tell that someone is thinking about suicide? It's not always possible to tell if someone is considering suicide. Kaya nga po, sinasabi nila na maraming warning signs that can be suggested na maaring nag-iisip na ang isang tao na gusto talaga magpatiwakal. So, not everyone shows these signs. It is also important na isipin natin na simply thinking about suicide doesn't automatically lead to an attempt. Kaya tandaan nyo kahit na pag naisip yon, hindi ibig sabihin gagawin yon. Yung iba talagang napag-iisipan lang siya. And what's more, these warning signs don't always mean that someone is always contemplating on it. And that being said, if you know someone who shows any of the following signs, it's best to encourage them not to talk to somebody or even to a mental health professional. Para sa ganun, kahit pa paano maiwasan yung naiisip nilang ito. So ano po ba yung mga posibleng mga senyales para kahit pa paano ma-prevent natin ito? Una, pag halimbawa pinag-uusapan nila ay tungkol sa kamatayan, or even yung about yung violence. Parang nakakagulat na all of a sudden, they talk about death. They talk about now, what if kung maaksidente ako? What if kung halimbawa namatay akong bigla? Ay mga tipo pong mga ganong topics na itatanong sa isang kaibigan. And then they even talk about yung dying na siguro pag namatay ako, ganito, ganyan, ganyan. Mga tipong ganon. And then, paano, alam mo, kumisan naiisip ko, gusto ko nang mamatay. Yung mga tipo pong mga ganyang mga salita. And then, they have this possibility also na they have access to weapons or things that could be used for suicide. So, parang, alam mo, gusto kong bumili ng barel. O bakit ka bibili ng barel? Tapos magugulat ka na lang kung minsan sa drawer nila, merong mga patalim doon, merong mga weapons for cutting, like yung talaga po kadalasan ay blade, mga scalpel, so anything that is sharp na pwedeng magamit. And then, there are even yung mga possibility na bakit ang dami-dami mga prescription drugs na or medications that entails about mga sleeping pills, yung mga tipo pong ganon, or yung mga bagay na talagang pag in-overdose mo, talagang pag nakatulog ka, wala nang gising. Kaya, bakit biglang marami on hand itong taong ito? Another possibility is yung biglang rapid changes in mood. Ito yung tinatawag natin mga mood swings na kanina umaga, ang saya-saya, tapos ngayong hapon, biglang lumungkot, iyak ng iyak, at talagang ang iniisip kung ano-ano na parang nababahala, and then it even comes a point na irritable. They even talk about feeling of being hopeless, wala na silang pag-asa, worthless, parang feeling nila hindi na sila kailangan sa mundong ito, and then parang nagiging burden sila, siguro pabigat lang ako sa pamilya ko kaya ganito, and then they feel trapped or yung parang wala na, talagang hindi nila ako naiintindihan, yung mga tipong ganun.
So you want to start a podcast? Or perhaps you've already started one, but you're still unclear on how you can actually make this podcasting work. No worries. That's why we're here for you. We are Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate, powered by Kangaroo Fern Media Lab. Join our network. Contact us at info@kangaroofern.com because we're stronger together.
Sometimes, there's also this possibility na napaka-impulsive or yung behavior nila napaka-risky, parang pag nagalit, bigla na lang lalabas, pupunta sa yung biglang magde-drive, and then tapos biglang naging reckless yung driving na akala nyo parang may hinahabol ng tinatawag natin demonyo. Tapos and then they even try na parang gusto nila, ano kaya kung skydiving ako, yung mga definitely parang risky sports, yung mga extreme sports, biglang nagkaroon ng ganon. And then, eventually, yung iba naman nagkakaroon ng pagkakataon na nagkakaroon ng substance misuse, nag-a-attempt, bigla na gumamit ng, kung hindi lang mga sabihin na natin, prohibited na drugs, kung hindi, yung talagang sabihin, yung mga bawal na gamot na tinatawag. And, eventually, they withdraw from friends and even family members. They isolate themselves from social activities. All of a sudden, na dating sobrang ang saya-saya, ang hilig-hilig mag-party, umayaw. Tapos sasabihin nila, ayaw nila, tamad na tamad. And it even comes to a point na ayaw na maligo. At pag ayaw ng maligo, biglang parang it's one way na hindi po sinasabi na nine-neglect lang nila yung personal hygiene nila. Unconsciously, ito po yung sinasabi natin na one way na i-withdraw nila yung sarili na syempre pag namamaho kayo, inaayawan kayo, hindi kayo lalapitan. So, definitely, umpisa natin na hindi po isang araw na hindi paliligo lang yan. Maaring 3 o 4 or even 1 linggo nang hindi naliligo itong taong ito. Tapos, ito yung mga tipo ng tao na sumasobra ang tulog. Na dati, 5 o 6 na oras, okay na siya. Tapos talagang nagagawa niya yung mga daily routines niya. All of a sudden, biglang matutulog ng 10:00, magigising ng hapon na. Or kaya naman, matutulog ng 10:00 ng gabi, magigising ng 12:00, hindi na siya makakatulog. So, there is also extreme anxiety and agitation. So, kumisan din, napakakalmado, Tapos parang ang tahimik nung mood niya, especially after an agitated or emotional behavior. Talagang yung tinatawag nating labile mood. So, talagang may swing of moods na ganyan na parang ikaw mismo hindi mo maintindihan kung ano yung nangyayari sa taong yon. So, even if they aren't considering suicide, these signs may still suggest something serious is going on. Kaya wag niyo isasawang tabi or isasawalang bahala yung mga nakikita nitong mga senyales. While it is important also to look to the whole picture na not assuming na these are signs always indicate suicidality or suicidality. It also best to take these signs seriously. So, kaya nga sinasabi natin na huwag kayong yung maging complacent. Hindi, ganyan naman talaga yan eh. Ganon. Hindi po. Kailangan isipin natin bakit nga ba nagkakaganon yung ating kapatid, yung ating member of the family, or even mga kaibigan natin na nagkakaroon na ganyan. If someone always shows concerning these signs and symptoms, you have to check on them kung ano ba talaga ang kanilang nararamdaman. So, ano po ba yung mga possible causes of suicide? Definitely, sa mga researchers po at saka mga research na aking nasaliksik, talagang wala pong exactly sabihin natin na kadahilanan why some people develop suicidal thoughts. They suspect na maaring meron pong genetics na involved. At the same time, meron naman ding history yung taong iyon, o kaya naman they found among people with the family na yung parang kung hindi man sabihin yung members of the family, pero sa henerasyon nila, maaring malayong kamag-anak ay talagang may naggawa nito. But hindi pa rin po talaga eksakto dahil kasi marami pa rin mga pag-aaral na talagang hinahanap po ang tunay na kadahilanan kung bakit nagagawa ng isang tao ito. Aside from the fact na talagang malaki po ang factor ng genetics dito, it can also we can also say na yung mga sinabi kong mga kadahilanan about yung losing a loved one, financial distress, yung at the same time kung nagkakahiwalay, ay maaring mag-trigger ng depressive episode. And this can lead to people contemplating on a way out. Parang wala na silang option, ang naiisip nila ang best option ay gawin itong bagay nito. Another common trigger ng suicidal thoughts ay yung feeling of being isolated. Yun na po yung nagiging problema dahil kasi merong mga pagkakataon na parang akala nila nag-iisa na lang sila sa mundo. They feel so empty na yung kalungkutan, hindi lang po basta ito kalungkutan. Ito rin po ay nagsasabi na talagang sabihin nila na nag-iisa na lang sila. Yun yung pakiramdam nila na nakakalungkot. And sometimes, this feeling of isolation can be caused by yung possibility of sexual orientation, religious beliefs, gender identity, and worse is the fact na wala silang mahinga ng tulong, walang sumusuporta dun sa mga pangyayari na iniisip nila or gumugulo sa kanilang kaisipan. Is it bad to ask someone if they have this feeling of being suicidal? You may worry na, lalo na kung isang mahal sa buhay, itanong nyo, kasi baka mamaya lalong gawin pag tinanong yun, or bring up the topic will put the idea in their head. So, ito yung pinaka most common myth. But remember, it's just a myth. Nung mga researches na nung bandang 2014, it suggests na ito po yung opposite effect, na talking about suicide can help reduce thoughts of suicide and may also have a positive effect sa mental health. Kaya nga ho natin dapat pag-usapan nga ito. Hindi yung parang natatakot kayong pag-usapan, baka kasi lalong gagawin. Hindi. Kinakailangan nga na malaking bagay po ang tinatawag nating talk therapy para maintindihan kung ano po talaga ang nararamdaman ng isang tao. And since people considering suicide often feel alone, asking about suicide can let them know you care. Iba po yung talagang sabihin na natin na yung nag-aalala ka. You have to be sincere in saying that. Hindi po yung sabihin nyo, ay nakakalungkot naman na ba't mo inisip yan. Hindi pinagdadaan. Yun nga ho yung nagiging palaging problema. Akala nila it's just a phase. No, it's not a phase. Talaga pong merong nararamdaman itong taong ito. And if you care enough, you have to understand what is going on. Hindi po makontrol na ibang tao pag nakakaramdam po sila nito. It is important, however, to ask in a helpful way and be direct and don't be afraid to use the word suicide. So, how do you go about na when you talk about this? So, first, you have to ask how they're feeling. For example, naisip mo ba na mag-suicide ka? Have you ever have thoughts about hurting yourself? Or baka naman mamaya meron ka dyang panaksak o blade. Tigilan mo nga yan, yung mga tipong gano'n. You can do it in such a way na hindi kayong problemado habang kinakausap mo yung kaibigan mo or yung isang member ng family. You have to really listen to what they say. Even if what they're going through doesn't seem like a serious concern to you, you have to acknowledge it by validating their feelings and offering empathy and support. Hindi yung parang akala mo arte-artihan lang. Kasi kumisan, pag yung kausap mo, talagang desidido, wala, parang magugulat ka na lang na pwedeng gawin nila at any time. So try your best to offer yung empathy na yon and to give that support. Tell them you care and encourage them to get help. Siguro po wala namang masama kung sabihin nyo na, uy, ano ka, gusto mo samahan kita, ha? Parang meron, kasi hindi ko rin naman alam kung anong naiisip mo eh. Ba't mo ba iniisip yung mga ganyan? So when you're feeling, sounds na parang, it's so difficult to handle and you're so worried about what's happening, you try your best na talagang to encourage them to get help. So, another thing, how do I know they aren't just looking for attention? Naku, yan po yung unang napakahirap na naiisip na yung hindi man naisip, kung hindi ito yung palaging naiisip ng mga tao na, naku, humihingi lang yan ng attention, kaya nag-iisip na ganito yung sasabihin niya, puro magpapakamatay, hindi naman natutuloy. Remember, some people might view talking about suicide as nothing more than a plea for attention. People consider committing suicide as having often thought about it for some time. Kumisan ang tagal-tagal na nilang pinaplano yan. Parang sinabi nila, ay pagdating ko ng age ganito, gagawin ko na to. Parang ganun. So matagal nang pinaplano yon. And then these thoughts come from a place because of yung sobrang sakit, deep pain na sinasabi. And it's essential to take their feelings na something serious. Others might feel na yung palagi natin sinasabi na suicide is a selfish act. Hindi mo na kasi inisip yung pamilya mo na pag nawala ka, sila rin magdurusa. And it's understandable to feel that way. Especially if you've lost a loved one to suicide. How could they do this? Alam naman nila na talagang ang sakit-sakit ng naramdaman ko na nawala siya. Para tuloy inisip ko, wala akong nagawa. But this notion is false. It does a disservice to people considering suicide by minimizing their plan. Yung pong nararamdaman na sakit eventually becomes so difficult to cope with that they begin to contemplate one more day seems unbearable. Parang pag hindi ko pa tinuloy ito, talagang hindi ko na kaya. Yung mga tipong ganun po yung nararamdaman. People who arrive at the option of suicide may often feel they become a burden to their loved ones. So, akala nila palagi na talagang wala naman akong kwenta ang tao eh. Bakit pa kailangan ako mabuhay? Hindi nga nanaintindihan. May palagi na nga feeling ko. I'm always yung parang pinag-uusapan na kung pwede lang mag-disappear, gagawin nila. Dahil kasi nga, feeling lang wala na silang kwenta ng tao. In their eyes, suicide may feel like a selfless act that will spare their loved ones from having to deal with them. Sabi nga nila, pag nawala ako, o di wala na nga silang problema, ganun po ang naiisip nila. And then at the end of the day, it is important to consider na yung perspective na itong tao ito, talagang sobra yung mga struggles sa buhay. The urge to live is very human, but so is the desire to stop the pain. Yung pong nararamdaman na sakit ay sobra-sobra sa isang taong nagko-contemplate ng pagpapatiwakal ng kanyang buhay. Someone may see suicide as the only option to make pain stop, though they may spend a lot of time questioning the decision, even agonizing over the pain others will feel. Siguro po magkakaroon tayo ng part 2 kasunod nito dahil kasi alam niyo naman napakahaba ng pagdating sa ganito. Alam ko marami pa rin kayong katanungan. And after this, pwede po namin ding ibigay sa inyo yung mga possibility na talagang kung sakasakali man na nag-iisip kayong ganito. Dito sa Pilipinas po, may mga hotline numbers tayo na ibibigay ko po sa inyo at siguro po ay isusulat din ng Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate kung ano po yung mga pwedeng numbers na makakatulong sa inyo. Dito po sa atin, meron po tayong Hopeline Natasha Goldberg Foundation para po sa mga nagkaroon ng depression and suicide prevention hotline para sa yung mga tao na talagang nagko-contemplate at nagsasuffer pero ayaw po nilang sabihin na talagang meron silang depression. So, bibigay po natin yung mga numbers na pwede pong makatulong. Tapos, meron po tayong tinatawag na Tawag Paglaum Centro Bisaya. Ito naman po ay a 24/7 call-based hotline for suicide prevention and emotional crisis intervention based in Cebu City. At higit po sa lahat, nandito po ang National Center for Mental Health. There's also this 24/7 crisis hotline na ina-assist ang mga tao with mental health disorder ranging from counseling to psychiatric emergencies and suicide prevention. So, ibibigay po namin yung mga numbers na yon para sa ganun makatulong po sa inyo. So, abangan niyo po ang part 2 ng ating topic na ito. Thank you!
Thank you for listening. Make sure to visit our website at www.guerrillapodcastsyndicate.com where you can subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, rate and review this podcast and share it with your friends. You can also join the conversation with Guerrillas RV on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please consider on making a donation to help us keep making the podcast you love. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. A Guerrilla Podcast Syndicate production.